Saskatchewan has a high rate of domestic violence when compared to other provinces. Just about a year ago, the Saskatchewan Domestic Violence Death Review was released with 19 recommendations for the province. I'm joined now by Joanne Duzel, who is the Executive Director of the Provincial Association of Transition Houses and Services of Saskatchewan. Thank you so much for joining me today, Joanne.
Thanks for having me.
I wanted to start with the Redwood case. We learned the sentence yesterday. What were your thoughts on the case, on the sentence, especially considering the history of violence there?
Well, I think there's lots of lessons to be learned from this case. And one of those lessons is that in almost every case of domestic homicide, the people around the victim knew what was happening but didn't know how to respond in such a way to actually save the victim. I think that the history of domestic violence that was shown on the part of Duran Redwood, 12 years of history, 3 separate victims, should have been an indicator that more supports were needed in order to prevent harm from coming to other individuals. And I really applaud Celeste's mother, Carla Yanni, for the comments that she has made in terms of hoping that the tragic death of her daughter, can actually lead to greater awareness and education around the dynamics of intimate partner violence, so people recognize it sooner, are more able to get help, and this can potentially save lives.
What do you think needs to happen around that education to improve it?
I think ideally we have education throughout our school system as a mandatory part of the curriculum that's age appropriate from kindergarten all the way through post-secondary, and that other forms of education are actually put out to the general public, so we're reaching all of our population in Saskatchewan. Unfortunately, what I find in my travels and the training that I do sometimes through our organization is that a lot of people in the general public really don't understand what all the dynamics of intimate partner violence are. Everybody knows that a punch in the face is domestic violence, but they don't understand that it's also a pattern of behavior that includes things like excessive jealousy, like economic control, like isolating the victim from family and friends. And those are very powerful indicators that serious harm can come to the person who's being controlled in that way.
Clearly, Saskatchewan does have a problem with domestic violence, and those 19 recommendations reflect that. Where do you think we're at in regards to addressing those 19 recommendations? It's been about a year, a little bit of a nod towards it in the provincial budget, but where do you stand on that?
Well, I think there's a lot more that still needs to be done. As you mentioned, there were some resources that went to children exposed to violence programs and some interpersonal violence and abuse counseling positions. A few were approved for rural areas, so that's a good start. But if you look at the 4 distinct areas of recommendations that were in the report of the Domestic Violence Death Review panel, there was 4 specific areas. One was awareness and education. So that's the piece that I mentioned that I feel is so very important. The other piece of that is intervention and assessment. So looking at which individuals, which couples really need that support in order to be safe. And I think we have, again, I think we're moving towards that when I think of some of the things that RCMP and the Saskatchewan Police Commission are doing. There are some kind of small, quiet steps being taken in that direction, which are very good. Another category was when children are involved in cases where domestic violence is occurring. And I really think we need to look at the supports that are in place and the legislation, and making sure that our justice system is keeping the safety of the children at the core of their decision-making process when they're making decisions about custody and access. And the final category of recommendations through that report actually had to do with resources, because all of this unfortunately will take some financial resources, and sometimes it's just the will to make changes to legislation or policy, but we need to make sure that we're following through with that. We don't want this to fall off the map after that good work was done in that report.
All right, well, lots to go through with this, so thank you so much for taking the time to chat today, Joanne.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you.